This keyboard has a crazy amount of flex. Personally, I would describe this as trampoline flex. This is the MOD007 PC and it's one of my favorite keyboards at the moment for this exact reason. For $110, you get the standard Akko treatment, the board, keycap puller, rubber cord cable, and some extra novelty keycaps. These ones are zoo themed, which look really nice. I immediately put them on my board. From the outside, this looks like a polycarbonate version of the MOD007, but there are a few key changes on the inside. Starting off with the PCB, it's south-facing, which we saw in the MOD007S refresh, and as you can see, this PCB is absolutely loaded with flex cuts and no RGB at all. Akko describes it as perky flex cuts, and I'm inclined to agree. All of the alphas have flex cuts surrounding the individual keys, and we already know what that does. F-Pro and the mods do not have this, which I'm okay with, as flex cuts usually lead to thin sound. That's the trade-off. The structure of this preload does follow the trend of most, where there's a lot of foam inside. Case foam, PE sheet, and plate foam. The sound signature of this keyboard was described as clacky out of the box, and while yes, it's slightly towards the higher pitch, I would say it's more towards the marbly sound thanks to the PE foam inside. With the prelude piano switches, the cherry profile keycaps with a decent thickness, and the foam in the keyboard, the stock sound is pretty good here. Take a listen. While I had the board disassembled for B-roll, I thought I'd at least try a second config. So I cleaned out the stabs and re-lubed them with some Crytox 205 Grade 0. Still had a lot of rattles, so I cleaned them out a second time and wholly modded them before lubing with Crytox 205 Grade 0 again. Then I added these tub lube rooster switches by Septify. I made 2 shorts on these switches if you want to check that out. Here's how the second config sounds. I'm going to call this next segment the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's start with the good. Cheap price, very affordable and competitive, good stock sound with the PE foam. The piano switches are pretty decent stock. I'm perfectly fine with using them as is. 75% layout is a good sweet spot. The stabs, with the exception of the spacebar, are pretty good. Again, I'd use the 2U mod as is. And of course, this super fun amount of flex. It's the first keyboard I've ever tried where typing normally you actually feel the flex, and you can see it too. Unless you're a light typer, you'll see the number row move around as you type, and it makes every keyboard I own now feel really stiff. Even what was my previous Flexus board, the Akko Alice Plus, doesn't feel as bouncy as I remember. Now let's get into the bad. Starting with the keycaps. At a glance, they look pretty normal, but after taking a stronger look, you start to notice all these weird inconsistencies in the legending. Like, take a look at the B next to the keycaps on either side, then F with the surrounding keys. Look at the W on Windows, Alt versus FN and Control, the K in backspace. These are just some of the examples that I'm listing, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. All things considered, I am being a bit harsh here. In everyday use, I would be fine with using the keycaps, provided I'm blindfolded. Honestly, it's not that bad. It's a pretty easy fix. Just swap the keycaps out for another. Same thing with the spacebar, as a little bit of 205 Grade 0 will go a long way here. But now let's get into the ugly, as these are part of the board itself. First up is the knob. Straight up, it feels like a $2 knob. A lot of wobble, slippery, doesn't sit flush with the case, so you get this weird look while using it where it's floating but not floating. This is entirely subjective, but what isn't subjective is that it's a completely different shade of white from the case, more towards the cooler side. It's like the keycaps where once you see it, you can't unsee it. Following the theme of the knob, the case isn't great either. The case plastic just feels so cheap and thin. The best way I can show it to you is this knock test against my KVD67 Lite, which costs $100 for the case alone. Take a listen. So that's it. I love typing on this keyboard. Can't really recommend it though, since everything apart from the flexible PCB is a bit of a deal breaker. This board goes all in on the flex cut in the PCB, which leaves the rest of the board feeling like a bit of an afterthought. Another reason I can't really recommend this keyboard is that the Mons Geek M1 exists. I won't go too in depth since I reviewed the board last video, but dollar for dollar, I think the M1 has better value, just in general, as it's much more well-rounded and refined in my opinion. Even after considering the fact that the M1 is a bare bones and the final build will probably cost at least $50 to $60 more than this board, it still doesn't really change my opinion. The only thing that goes against the M1 here is that there is next to no flex, very much in contrast with this board. I don't have an original MOD007 with me, but I would sure like to see the PCB here offered as a standalone purchase for existing MOD007 users, provided they're compatible, which I would expect given that they share the same name. Had they just increased the price by $20 or $30 and uplifted the case and knob, maybe including gasket socks and screw-in stabs, this keyboard would have been so much better. But these are things that I find wrong with the board. Whether they're a deal breaker or not for you, all comes down to what you're looking for. Anyways, that wraps up my review on the Akko MOD007 PC. If you're interested in picking it up, I will leave a link to it in the description. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And see you next video.